No parent deserves to watch their child's future slip away with every shallow breath. Even the world's richest man can learn this agony. Beneath starched sheets, in the hush of a sterile hospital room, Alexander Hale bent over his 7-year-old son and faced a shattering truth too many parents carry in secret: all the power, privilege, and fortune on earth could not buy time. Machines beeped and hummed, flashing green on monitors, but none could restore Ethan's fading smile, the one that used to light up those marble halls and echo in rooms now haunted by silence. Once, Alexander believed sorrow was for the weak, a burden carried by men too small to outmaneuver fate. Today, as the world outside his penthouse thrived in careless morning light, he could barely meet his own eyes in the polished metal of the hospital elevator. Money had taught him to control outcomes, silence threats, and build legacies. Now grief stripped away all pretense, leaving behind a father, powerless, undone, desperate. If this story has already touched your heart, tap subscribe and comment where you're watching from. Share your city, someone out there needs your kindness today. Ethan's little hand looked even smaller inside Alexander's trembling palm. The boy's favorite plush tiger, a battered thing from a garage sale, tucked on the pillow beside him, worn fur clutching the last of his childhood hope. At dawn, the boy turned his ashen face from the machines and whispered, "Daddy, can you tell me the story again? The one where the sun comes back." Alexander's throat caught. He'd told the story once, on a night when work calls never ended and his wife was already packing suitcases downstairs. Even then, Ethan had believed his father's words could bring light into darkness. Now, Alexander's voice broke as he said, "Of course, son. The sun always comes back. You just have to hold on until morning." But in that stark room, even the sunrise felt like a lie. Every hour that day was a carousel of dread and longing. Nurses slipped in and out, polite smiles forced, never meeting his eyes. Hospital administration called often: insurance, release forms, donor lists. The newest update was always the same: Ethan's donor match was delayed, the paperwork stuck, the window narrowing. Alexander's empire was worthless in these corridors. His calls to board chairmen, senators, hospital benefactors, all resulted in careful apologies and soft refusals. He prowled the hospital's quietest wings at night, trading his tailored jacket for the anonymity of a grieving father. In every waiting room, he met mothers with red-rimmed eyes, fathers with fists tight on coffee cups, grandparents who pressed tiny socks to their faces for comfort. Here, status dissolved. All that remained was need. Back at the Hale estate, once brimming with staff and guests, echoes replaced laughter. Grief turned everyone away, chambermaids found easier posts, the chef requested indefinite leave, even the trusted nanny returned to school. The silence in the marble foyer pressed against his chest. Windows glimmered unwashed, dust layered the chandeliers. Ethan's toys were scattered like relics. An abandoned model airplane lay crashed beneath a portrait of Alexander shaking hands with a president. The last housekeeper left 2 nights before the latest crisis. Alexander, exhausted, barely registered the loss, until he came home and found empty cabinets and stale air. His assistant assured him a replacement was coming. The agency, she promised, only sent their very best. Alexander doubted he would notice any difference. When you are numb with loss, strangers and furniture all blur into shapes without meaning. It was a Tuesday when Mariah arrived. She appeared in the kitchen as first light filtered through clouded windows. She wore a simple blue uniform, a white apron crisply tied at her waist, and her long black hair was braided neatly down her back. Mariah Johnson, 28, a quiet force in the bright stillness of a home in mourning. Her skin glowed warm in the pale morning, eyes alert with quiet observation. She moved through the halls with humility, not shying from the disrepair or the layers of grief in the air. She began work at once, washing dishes with unhurried focus, airing out Ethan's blankets, singing softly to herself a hymn that drifted up the stairs, warm and round and filled with longing. Alexander, sleepless and brittle, stumbled into the kitchen and stopped short. He expected awkwardness or forced kindness. He found instead Mariah's gentle steadiness, her ability to seem present but never intrusive. She greeted him. "Good morning, Mr. Hale. I'm Mariah. Your assistant explained the situation. If you need anything else for Ethan or the house, I'll take care of it." Alexander mumbled thanks, blinking in confusion at her self-possession. That afternoon, a rare one at home, he noticed how Ethan, reclusive and fearful since the last hospitalization, crept to the staircase as Mariah recited stories in a low, melodic voice. Her words lured him close, her stories full of little boys who built castles from pillows and made rivers from bedsheets. When Mariah knelt to tie Ethan's untidy shoelaces, he didn't flinch away. In that instant, Alexander saw something break loose in his son's expression. Not joy, Ethan hadn't smiled in weeks, but a lifting of heaviness, a wary ease. Mariah kept speaking, touching Ethan's shoulder as if she had always belonged there. Mariah made the home breathe again. She moved through the estate, quietly tending to the small details others had forgotten. She organized the pantry, ordered fresh fruit, placed wildflowers from the garden in glass tumblers by Ethan's bedroom. Her presence was a balm, smoothing the sharp edges of worry, stitching hope across the raw places Alexander thought would never heal. He found himself pausing at doorways, listening. One evening, he caught Mariah's voice through Ethan's half-open door. "Brave hearts come in small packages. My grandma always said, sometimes it's enough just to hold someone's hand until the morning." Ethan sighed with contentment, drifting into sleep. Later, Alexander lay awake in his own room, staring at the ceiling fan spinning shadows. He envied Mariah. She brought comfort not through money or grand gestures, but through presence, patience, and faith. In her care, his son felt seen. Alexander counted all he'd lost by chasing things, a marriage, a childhood, time. He wished, for the first time, he could trade places with the help. If you've ever loved someone so deeply that you wish you could ease their pain, drop a comment below with your city. Let's show parents around the world they are not alone. And make sure to subscribe. Stories like Ethan's can strengthen us all. But hope does not banish sorrow. Crisis came soon after. It started in the small hours, the night Ethan's temperature spiked again and the hospital called. In the rush to pack, Alexander fumbled his phone. Mariah, already dressed, appeared at the bedroom door with Ethan's favorite blanket, the plush tiger snuggled against her chest. Alexander, strained, barked a half-order, "Just handle things. The hospital needs us now." She nodded, following him to the car without a word. On the road, Ethan lay limp in Mariah's lap. She sang softly, barely audible above the whir of tires on asphalt. Alexander stared at her once in the rearview mirror, wondering about the past that taught her to soothe a child who wasn't her own. At the hospital, a new wave of tests and doctors, a blur of unfamiliar names and jargon, descended on them. Alexander's world contracted down to the weight, another failed donor, paperwork lost in bureaucracy, specialists too busy or too late. Beneath the worry, guilt gnawed. He replayed 100 mistakes. Missed birthdays, storming out during Ethan's tantrums, the night his ex-wife left him for good, the walls he built to block out emotion now keeping him from his own son. Hours bled into another dawn. Alexander slumped on a hard bench, face in his hands. In the next room, Mariah whispered to Ethan about hope, about patience, about the bravery of just holding on. Ethan clung to her hand in feverish sleep. Lost, Alexander drifted toward the hospital chapel. The place was empty but for rows of wooden pews and the faint flicker of votive candles. Normally, he scoffed at faith, a relic, a superstition for the powerless. Now, empty, he whispered a prayer of his own, not for wealth, not for power, just for one more chance to love his child right. He returned to the ward to find Ethan sleeping soundly, Mariah still hunched in the chair beside him. She looked up as Alexander entered. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the grieving father, the humble maid. When Ethan woke that afternoon, Alexander reached for his son's hand. But Ethan turned his head and murmured, "I want Mariah, Daddy." The boy's pale blue eyes stayed fixed on her, trust and longing mingled together. The world slowed. Alexander felt the weight of every failure and every lost year. He tried to answer, but words failed. That night, when nurses checked Ethan's vitals and Alexander waited outside the glass, Mariah read aloud from a book, her voice steady. The boy slept, his grip never loosening from her fingers. Alexander left the hospital close to midnight, the city twinkling beneath him, cold and unattainable. He returned to the silent mansion, every room echoing with what might have been. Old photographs lined the halls, Ethan's baby pictures next to headlines about Alexander's latest success. None of it mattered now. All he wanted was another morning with his son. At dawn, his phone rang. He answered, breathless, expecting bad news. It was the night nurse. "Sir. Ethan is asking for Miss Mariah. He won't see anyone else." In that moment, the ache in Alexander's chest deepened beyond words. Grief, love, regret, they blended into a kind of hope he had never known. Sometimes, the strongest thing a father can do is let others bring comfort when he cannot. He rushed to the hospital, but paused outside the room. Through the glass, he saw Ethan sleeping in Mariah's arms, a faint smile touching his lips even as tubes and wires snaked around him. Mariah stroked his hair, humming that low, aching hymn. Alexander watched, realizing that love, raw and unadorned, was being restored in ways he never foresaw. And for the first time in his life, he understood that true wealth was never meant to shield us from sorrow, but to teach us the depth of what we might lose. Ethan, in crisis, finds solace only in Mariah's presence. Alexander, left on the outside, faces the fullness of all he neglected, his own redemption now uncertain. The sun set behind the city skyline, painting long shadows across the hospital's polished floor. Within those silent corridors, Alexander Hale paced with the energy of a man haunted, each step weighed down by memories he could not escape. The previous night loomed in his mind, Ethan's pale hand reaching for Mariah instead of him, the quiet of his own heart breaking anew. Alexander's grip on control had slipped, his authority eroded by guilt and helplessness. He had paid for the best doctors, private rooms, round-the-clock specialists. Yet Ethan's condition remained unchanged, and each day brought a new complication. Alexander's power was a mirage in the world of illness. Mariah Johnson became a constant presence in those gray days. She tended to Ethan not like an employee, but like someone who knew loss. Her attentiveness surfaced in dozens of small ways, a new story every afternoon, damp towels at his bedside, adjusting the four with gentle hands the nurses later said they admired. Alexander watched, divided between gratitude and envy, as Ethan gained comfort from Mariah's care. The boy rarely smiled, but for her he tried, sometimes enough to make Alexander ache with longing and regret. The tension brewed each time Alexander entered the room. His attempts at conversation were stiff, his words always slipping into talk of test results or treatment plans. Ethan recoiled from medical updates, his attention wandering back to Mariah at every lull. Like and subscribe to not miss what happens next in this emotional journey. It was Mariah who broke the walls of silence, telling Ethan stories of a childhood spent under hot Alabama sun, running barefoot through gardens, her grandmother's laughter echoing in the wind. Ethan was transfixed, his world expanding beyond 4 drips and the tightening grasp of illness. Alexander listened at the edge of each story, searching for mistakes to correct, always finding none. One rainy afternoon, a setback shook all hope. Ethan's fever spiked without warning, his body racked by chills. Alexander argued with the doctor about alternate options, desperate for a solution, an untested medication, a risk he was willing to pay for in cash or promises. The doctor, pressed and weary, refused. "He's too fragile for that, Mr. Hale. All we can do now is wait and pray." Alexander stormed into the corridor, his hands shaking. Everywhere he looked, ordinary parents clung to hope while he clung to influence. But inside Ethan's room, Mariah sat in patient vigil. She sang old hymns, her voice soft but strong enough to steady the boy's shudders. When Ethan drifted into sleep, Alexander let his mask drop and asked questions he had avoided for days. "How do you do it?" he murmured, voice breaking. "How do you give him comfort when I can't?" Mariah looked at him, her gaze unflinching. "Children need trust more than certainty, Mr. Hale. They know when we're afraid. My grandmother said, sometimes love survives best in the waiting." It was the first lesson Alexander had truly heard in years. He spent the night on a stiff hospital cot, sleep coming only in fragments. In dreams, he wandered the empty halls of his mansion, searching for Ethan's laughter and finding only the echo of regrets. At dawn, Mariah brought him coffee. Alexander stared at her, then at Ethan, unable to speak, a man accustomed to fixing, now learning how to endure. Hit like and subscribe so you'll know the next twist in their struggle. Renewed crisis struck that evening. A specialist insisted on another battery of tests, warning that Ethan's blood work showed signs of dangerous complications. For the first time, Alexander felt terror, not just worry, the possibility that Ethan might not survive even if a match was found. Mariah sat beside the bed, holding Ethan's hand through the worst moments, her voice a lifeline. With each new procedure, Alexander was forced to let go, retreating further into the background. Nurses began to defer to Mariah's insight about Ethan's comfort, recognizing her bond with the boy, a trust rooted deeper than blood or contract. Yet still, Alexander clung to hope wrapped in denial. He spent hours on the phone, offering rewards, promising donations, bending every connection possible. In every conversation, the answer was the same: wait. The nurse handed Alexander a folded piece of colored paper. Ethan had drawn a shaky picture of 3 figures under a big tree, himself, Mariah, and a far-off man with a suitcase. Alexander stared at the image, heart heavy, wondering if that was how his son saw him now, a distant traveler, never home. The clock ticked, hours stretching thin on the edge of another crisis. Alexander asked Mariah a question he had been holding in secret: "Why did you take this job, Mariah? Why here, why now?" She answered, not with the rehearsed politeness of hired help, but with gentle honesty. "Some children need more love than they're given. I lost someone once. Working for you, for Ethan. It helps me try to give back." Her answer ignited a flicker of understanding in Alexander. He had been searching for answers that money could buy, forgetting the value of vulnerability, the only thing Ethan wanted, and the only currency Mariah seemed to trade in. Like and subscribe, so you never miss a single moment of Ethan's fight. Late that night, the hospital quieted. Ethan drifted into shallow sleep, his face turned to Mariah, his fingers curled against hers, his lifeline. Alexander lingered at the door, uninvited, tormented by the walls between them. He wondered whether Ethan would ever reach for him again, or whether the substitute comfort of Mariah's presence was now all that remained. As the lights dimmed and the machines beeped their warnings, Alexander stepped out into the corridor, his fate resting not in boardrooms but in the small, tense bonds of love and loss. He resolved to stay nearby, even if only to stand guard outside Ethan's door. The final hours of night brought another unexpected turn. Ethan stirred and began to cough, his frail body racked with new pain. Mariah called for the nurse, fighting tears herself, her composure unraveling for the first time. Alexander was forced to watch, powerless, as the medical team rushed in, encircling the bed. In that moment, Alexander faced a truth he had avoided: his influence could summon doctors and devices, but the only comfort Ethan truly felt now was the warm hand of a stranger who refused to let go. Everything depended on what happened next, and for the first time, Alexander understood just how fragile, and how precious, hope could be. The future is uncertain as Ethan's condition worsens and Mariah's bond strengthens. Alexander is forced into the role of a witness, no longer able to shield his son nor reclaim their lost connection. Ethan's fate hangs in the balance. No parent forgets the sound: rushed footsteps on tile, low voices urgent beyond the hospital doors. Alexander's heart raced as he returned to Ethan's room after a rare moment of rest. The dimness was broken by fluorescent halos and the quiet beep of machines. Behind the glass, Ethan's small frame was racked with a violent cough, and Mariah's arms lifted him upright in instinctive, practiced compassion. Nurses gathered, frowning, responding to numbers on a monitor that suddenly screamed for attention. For Alexander, it was a parade of the familiar, chaos, hope collapsing, and the unwelcome realization he had to simply trust. He hadn't slept, couldn't, really, not with the uncertainty that filled every moment. The hope of a donor match was evaporating. By dawn, Ethan had stabilized, but barely. Alexander remained, rooted to the chair beside the bed, absorbing every tiny change in his son's breath and clinging to Mariah's gentle handling of the crisis. For a moment, he envied her strength, anger at himself for needing someone else to hold his world together. The next morning, the doctor delivered news with a somber calm. Ethan's window is closing. If we can't proceed with the transplant within 72 hours, we risk permanent complications. Alexander barely heard the rest. The implications flooded his thoughts, every fear he tried to bottle up fighting for space. Mariah lingered at Ethan's bedside, humming a lullaby as nurses administered fresh medication. Only when Ethan had at last dozed off did Alexander ask, almost pleading, "There's nothing left to do." She met his gaze, not flinching. "There's always something, Mr. Hale. Sometimes it's just not what you expect. Like and subscribe so you don't miss Ethan's fight for hope." That afternoon, Alexander fell into action, calls to distant hospitals, private jets prepped on standby, a network of influence flexed to the limit. Nothing worked. Each new specialist repeated the same verdict: too risky, too late. The match they had found was now unavailable due to unforeseen complications. The medical board wouldn't approve alternatives. For the first time since his empire took form, Alexander encountered a closed door he could not unbolt. He paced the hospital lobby, lost in a world where status meant nothing. Meanwhile, Mariah became Ethan's lifeline. She read to him, sketched images of sunlit trees, and, with the conviction of someone who truly known loss, told him stories of strength. Alexander overheard their quiet conversations and discovered truths unspoken. Ethan was afraid, not of doctors, not of pain, but of disappearing from his father's life. That night, Alexander remained at Ethan's side, letting Mariah slip back to the waiting lounge. He watched his son sleep and made a silent vow: he would give up everything for one more day with Ethan, one more laugh, one more hug. But as dark fell outside, the weight of powerlessness threatened to break Alexander. The grandeur of boardrooms and auctions seemed pathetic in the stillness of the ICU. He reached for his phone, ready to offer any sum for a miracle, and found only the emptiness of missed calls and messages unanswered. This time, it was not the sound of chaos that jarred him, but a soft knock on the glass. Mariah, hand steady, asked if she could speak with him. She pulled a folded document from her bag, a medical release, the corners wrinkled. "If you're willing to listen, Mr. Hale, I might be a match." For a second, Alexander couldn't process her words. You're not family." Tension spiraled between the two. Mariah's story spilled out. She had once gone through a similar testing process, after a tragic loss of her own. The details were private, but Alexander heard enough. A younger brother, gone too soon, and her willingness to risk her own future for someone else's child had never left her. "You might not want the help of a maid," she added quietly, "but I'm healthy. I'm willing." The hospital required legal vetting and a battery of rapid tests. Alexander barely slept, watching the process unfold, this time as a helpless observer. Not all staff were supportive. Some nurses voiced concern, whispering about motives and boundaries. Alexander overheard them and bristled, but could not allow himself irritation with the woman who had become his son's only source of real comfort. He signed confidentiality waivers and insurance forms, his signature shaking for the first time in years. Don't miss the next reveal. Like and subscribe now. Mariah never tried to comfort Alexander. She moved through the bureaucracy with quiet tenacity, her focus always on Ethan. When the moment came for her to explain to Ethan what was happening, she took his small hand and knelt beside his bed. Being brave means facing fear, Ethan. I'll help you, just like my family helped me when I was little. Ethan looked between them, eyes full of unshed tears, and whispered, "But I don't want anyone to get hurt for me." "You're not alone," Mariah promised, voice steady. "None of us are, not when we love each other." The tension that night in the waiting area was different. It wasn't only medical, but deeply personal. Alexander watched Mariah pace, saw her check messages on a battered old phone, saw her settle her breathing as though preparing for something immense. For the first time, he glimpsed the cost to her, not in risk, but in reopening old wounds. Hospital legal councils and ethics boards convened. The conversation was brisk, clinical, and at times condescending. Mariah would have to prove clear understanding of the risks, no coercion could be perceived, all boundaries reviewed. Alexander, powerful as he was excluded from much of this process. He was forced to trust. During this limbo, Ethan's health wavered. Fevers rose, medications changed, shifts of hope and fear thrummed through every hour. Alexander called his ex-wife, her voice sharp with terror and anger that this choice was even before them. Guilt twisted every word between them, each blaming the other for the past. That night, as the hospital lights flickered, Alexander begged forgiveness, first from her, then silently from his sleeping son. In the quiet, Mariah's history haunted her as well. She recalled her brother, a memory of a gentle boy whose own hospital room had once echoed with the same machineries of hope. She remembered the sorrow of being too late, the unfairness of love being measured in chances slip away. Now, as she waited for results, she braced herself, to save Ethan, perhaps to fail again, but never to back away from what was right. The night before the testing results, Alexander lingered in the cafeteria, unable to eat. Mariah found him there. For a long moment, neither spoke of the future. Instead, they talked, truly talked, for the first time. "I can't make sense of this world," Alexander confessed. "All my life, I believed there was always a way forward, another door to open. But now..." Mariah listened, then answered, "Sometimes, the only way through is together. I can't promise anything, but I can promise not to walk away." Alexander wept openly, for the first time since Ethan's diagnosis. Not just for loss, but for the first hint of relief, that someone else would not let his son face this alone. The next day dawned with a new storm. A team of doctors called both Alexander and Mariah into a conference room, grim faces behind confidential files. There were concerns. The match was close, but not perfect. The risk to Mariah was significant, the benefit to Ethan uncertain. The medical director stated, "We'll pursue every test, but we won't decide until we know all the facts. This is not a step we take lightly." Mariah, unwavering, signed every required document. Alexander looked in her eyes and saw what he had missed for years, a form of courage born not from victory, but from enduring heartbreak. She was willing to risk her health for his child, a gift that would change everything between them. As the day closed, Ethan's room was filled not with answers but the electric thrum of uncertainty. Alexander knew Mariah's sacrifice would become the greatest story of their lives, if only they survived it. This story is far from finished. Like and subscribe to follow every step. He sits by Ethan's bed and watches Mariah through the glass, both praying that when morning comes, they face their fates together. Mariah's test results are pending. Everything depends on her sacrifice. Alexander faces a world he cannot control, and the family waits for news that will either break them or bind them forever. The morning that test results were due, Alexander Hale woke not in a bed, but upright in a hospital chair, his neck stiff and his mind tormented by dreams of Ethan calling for help in endless, echoing hallways. He was greeted by pale sun spilling through half-drawn blinds and the muted shuffle of the ICU staff beginning their shift. The relentless beeping and bustle went on, unbroken even by hope. Mariah was already present, sitting vigil as she had for the past 3 days. Her focus never wavered, and she greeted Alexander with a tired but genuine smile as he stirred. The routine of waiting had become ritual, Alexander checking the monitors and hospital notes, Mariah bringing a mug of tea, Ethan lying mostly motionless, drifting in a haze of medication and exhaustion. "Any word?" Alexander asked, voice raw. "Not yet," Mariah answered, though both knew she'd checked multiple times before he'd even risen. They promised by this afternoon. The air was heavy with worry and anticipation. Mariah's quiet resolve holding the room together, Alexander's anxiety bubbling beneath the surface, ready to break. Ethan awoke briefly, eyes searching faces in the room. Alexander tried a smile but knew it looked false. Only at Mariah's gentle touch did Ethan's brow unfurl the slightest. In a small, white hospital lounge, Alexander met with Dr. Yates, the transplant coordinator. The news was neither good nor bad. "Mariah is a partial match," the doctor explained, careful and measured. "There's risk, especially with an unrelated donor. The ethics committee will meet at noon. If we move forward, we'll be in uncertain territory." This story is reaching its turning point. Like and subscribe for every crucial update. Back in the waiting room, Alexander's phone vibrated with messages from his company, ignored for the first time in decades. Numbers and deals seemed like relics from a former life. His world no longer revolved around board votes or market shifts, but around a boy's chance for survival and a woman's selfless offer to save him. Mariah sat beside Ethan, tracing the lines of a coloring book. Her hands, always patient, coaxed Ethan out of silence. She pulled from her purse a small pocket photo of a smiling little boy, her brother, long gone. "This is Jamal," she murmured, holding it so Ethan could see. "He was brave too. When I was scared, he would tell me it's okay to be afraid. Being brave doesn't mean you aren't scared. It means you still try." Ethan studied the picture, silent for a moment. Did he get better? Mariah's smile softened, shaded with memory. He didn't. But he changed a lot of lives. That's why I help. He would have wanted that. Ethan nodded, closing his fingers over Mariah's. Alexander witnessed the tender exchange and felt the first tremor of gratitude breaking through his sorrow, a gratitude for the person who had given Ethan comfort, and for the bond that had grown beyond his ability to control or understand. Late morning brought a sudden surge of activity. A nurse delivered a sealed letter to Mariah, instructions to appear before the ethics committee. The hospital's legal counsel needed her consent again, witnessed and recorded. Alexander tried to intervene, but the staff made it clear, this choice had to be Mariah's alone. Mariah left for the conference room, leaving Alexander at Ethan's bedside, racked with uncertainty. He wanted to beg, to promise anything for a miracle, but that power had been taken from him. He squeezed Ethan's hand, whispered a promise to be brave as well, and waited. Don't miss the next confession. Take a second to like and subscribe. Inside the glass-walled boardroom, Mariah sat before a dozen strangers. They asked the expected questions. Did she understand the risk? Was she acting under any outside pressure? Was she mentally prepared if the operation failed? Mariah held their gaze, telling the truth in a steady voice. She wanted to give Ethan a chance, not to erase her own pain, but to honor her brother's memory. Dr. Yates summarized, "We are in uncharted territory, but this is the only path left." Mariah signed the last consent form and was told the final clearance could take hours. When she returned, fatigue etched her every movement, but her spirit didn't break. Alexander offered his thanks, but Mariah brushed it off. "I'm not doing this for gratitude. I'm doing it for Ethan. And for myself." Midday came with its own disruptions. Journalists, having caught wind of the story, Billionaire's son, mysterious donor, waited in the lobby, cameras ready. Alexander demanded security. Members of the hospital board called with veiled threats about liability, about future donations. Alexander, for once, felt only disgust for the world he had once ruled. The hospital chaplain stopped by, offering prayer, but Alexander declined. Instead, he returned to Ethan's side, feeling the hours grind past. Mariah sat in the lounge, fingers intertwined, still, silent. Her thoughts drifted to Alabama, to childhood days before loss, to the long shadow Jamal's death had left on her life, the guilt for not having done more, the fear that love would always end in heartbreak. She braced herself for a future with or without Ethan, knowing that sacrifice often meant accepting the pain that came after. Afternoon at last brought the results. Mariah's donation was technically possible, the risk acceptable only because there were no other options. The operation would proceed first thing tomorrow. Tension rippled through every member of the team. The anesthesiologists and surgeons conferred, nurses hustled supplies, and Mariah signed final waivers. Alexander texted his ex-wife the update. She did not reply. Alone in a hospital family room, he grew more aware than ever of what he had not built: resilient love, the kind that survives the worst storms. Ethan awoke long enough to be told the plan. His lips trembled. "Daddy, will Mariah be okay?" Alexander knelt by the bed, fighting both tears and fear. "She's stronger than anyone I know. She's doing this because she cares." Mariah added softly, "We're a team, Ethan. We'll fight together. Always." As staff prepared Ethan for a pre-surgical transfusion, Alexander stepped outside for air. The sky above was a hard, cold blue, and for a moment, he hated it for shining when all he wanted was a world in mourning. Wandering into a quiet garden, he sat beneath a willow tree and wept for everything: the future he could not buy, the wife he had long since lost, the man he might never get to be. In that garden, surrounded by unfamiliar birdsong, he allowed hope to live in its most fragile form, a hope that depended on others. You're witnessing true sacrifice. Hit like and subscribe for every moment of hope. At sunset, Mariah finished her own preoperative preparation, quietly enduring a nurse's attempts at reassurance. She packed her things into a small rucksack. A photo of Jamal, a dog-eared book of psalms, a worn letter she had never shown anyone. She slipped the letter into her pocket, determined to keep her brother's memory close. Alexander wandered the halls, returning once more to the hospital chapel. He tried to pray, but words failed him. Instead, he lit a candle, one for Ethan, one for Mariah, and silently, one for himself. Nurses wheeled Ethan down the hall for an overnight stay in surgical prep. Mariah followed, her steps measured. Addressing Alexander at the elevator, she paused. "If I don't wake up, make sure Ethan knows he's enough, just as he is. That he didn't need to be saved to be loved." Alexander squeezed her hand, unable to speak. The elevator doors closed, splitting the trio for the first time in days. Alone in the quiet room, Alexander found Mariah's rucksack and the worn letter within. It was addressed not to her brother, but to a little boy she had lost herself, her own child, lost to illness years ago, before she was ever a maid. The letter was a prayer for forgiveness, for strength, for a future where someone else's child would get the chance Jamal and her own son hadn't. Alexander, devastated and awash in new understanding, realized Mariah's pain was not charity, it was kinship, a deep wound aching to be meaningfully filled. The night grew long. Alexander sat by Ethan's side, knowing Mariah was only a floor above, both fighting through the night. The hospital stood silent but for the hum of machines and the steps of nurses on rounds. Tomorrow would bring answers, one way or the other. As midnight passed, the head surgeon appeared in the doorway with final instructions and the steely calm of a man prepared for any outcome. "We'll take them down first thing. Rest if you can." Alone, Alexander put his head in his hands, unable to banish the image of the woman upstairs willingly risking her life for a boy whose father had almost lost him to pride. Mariah's letter, folded in his breast pocket, was a tangible link, pain and hope and sacrifice all interwoven, binding strangers together into something like family. Don't miss what happens at dawn. Remember to like and subscribe right now. Dawn was only hours away, and by then, all secrets would be laid bare, Mariah's, Alexander's, and the thin thread of hope tying them together across the most difficult night of their lives. With Mariah's sacrifice set for sunrise, Alexander holds Mariah's secret letter and braces himself for the surgery that will define every future moment. The fate of both his son and Mariah, and redemption for all, rests on a final act of courage the coming day will demand. The corridor outside the operating suite felt less like a hallway and more like the mouth of a storm, quiet, charged, trembling with the threat of what might come. As the clock neared 6, Alexander Hale found himself standing not in command of fate, but on its edge, a figure wrung out and unsure. The night had lasted forever, the hospital's pre-dawn lights glared down as if searching out every doubt, every secret. On the other side of swinging steel doors, Ethan and Mariah were being readied. Gowned, masked, marked for incision. Alexander watched the team wheel Ethan away, his hand numb from where he'd squeezed his son's fingers only moments earlier. "I'll see you very soon," he'd promised, lying through his teeth with the tenderness of a father desperate not to break what little hope remained. Ethan's eyes lingered, wide above the oxygen mask, asking questions neither could voice. Mariah, eyes calm and warm, had pressed the toy tiger to her chest and looked him in the eye. "For Jamal. For Ethan. For tomorrow, whatever it looks like," she whispered. She hadn't let on about the contents of that old letter, about the pain written through each graceful move. But Alexander, clutching that secret near his heart, was changed by her courage. The prep nurse called for Alexander to step back. The doors swung shut. He was alone. He returned to the family waiting room, a box with cold coffee and silence, where hurried prayers went half-finished and the waiting was an affliction unto itself. Alexander tried reading the news, failed to focus on words. His body wanted action, but the world allowed only stillness. Hospital minutes stretch and break. Outside, dawn came, thin, gray, unsympathetic. Nurses moved with quiet assurance, whispering only when necessary. The clock over the desk seemed to run slow, dragging every moment through knots. In another corner, the chaplain offered coffee, which Alexander barely touched. When the elevator chimed and doctors in blue passed silently, his breath caught every time. Stay with this journey. Like and subscribe for every heartbreak and every hope. An hour passed. The attending surgeon arrived with updates. Ethan was under, organ stable. Mariah's procedure was next, her vitals monitored closely. The surgeon was matter-of-fact, clinical, yet there was a heaviness not lost on Alexander. "This is at the edge of what we do," the surgeon said. "There are uncertainties, but our team is ready." Alexander nodded, unable to speak, his trust invested in strangers, his family's future now bound to the choices of people he'd never know past the masks and gloves. He texted Ethan's mother, received no reply, then dialed his company's COO only to say he'd be unreachable. For the first time, the company learned it was second, and the silence after that call almost felt like freedom. Time crawled. Alexander, plagued by images of Mariah on the gurney, replayed old conversations, searching for warning signs or moments where fate could have turned, if only he had noticed. In his mind, his failings paraded, the days he left Ethan alone with nannies, the countless birthdays phoned in from hotel rooms across the globe, the habit of building walls not bridges. But the picture that haunted him most was not of Ethan's suffering. It was Mariah's steady hands, her quiet courage, and the bruised faith stitched together by loss. For the first time, he realized how rare grace was in the world he'd built and how easily compassion slipped through the cracks when pride paved every hallway. A nurse entered. "We're about to move to the next stage." The team would begin the transfer, a delicate, time-locked choreography. Any error, any setback, could tip fate one way or the other. Don't miss the next moment. Like and subscribe to experience every twist firsthand. He drifted toward the hospital chapel, candle stubs flickering in the airless corner. The chaplain spoke sparingly, offering a simple benediction for everyone involved, not victory, not even hope, just endurance. Alexander lit a candle for Mariah. For the first time, he prayed not for a miracle, but for the strength to face life as it arrived, regardless of outcome. Back at the waiting station, chairs filled with faces both familiar and new. A volunteer offered soup. Alexander refused. Sunlight spilled across the linoleum in warped squares. Outside, traffic began its indifferent churn. The world didn't pause for his crisis. A medical intern from the surgical team approached, voice shaking with youth and nerves. "There's a complication," she said. "Mariah's stats are fluctuating. We're working, please wait just a little longer." In those words, Alexander felt a kind of suffocation, but also a strange pride. Mariah fought as Ethan fought, stubborn and fragile as hope itself. He clenched the letter in his pocket. Words bled into his thoughts, lines written to a lost child, a plea for meaning that echoed his longing for Ethan's tomorrows. He almost wished Mariah were family, only then could he make sense of the pain and sacrifice entwining their fates. Nurses passed by, some offering a glance of gentle sympathy. Others did not look up. Alexander existed in a world of waiting, suspended between what was and what might be. To his left, an old man slept open-mouthed in a recliner. To his right, a young couple prayed together in a language he didn't know. Hours passed. A fresh team of doctors replaced the last, quietly switching badges and reviewing charts. The hospital became a kind of theater, each act set by those behind swinging doors, audience limited to suffering and love. Every heartbeat matters. Like and subscribe before the final reveal unfolds. A buzz erupted, hospital codes barked, pagers shrilled. Alexander sprung from his seat as several doctors hurried between doors. The clock froze, the air thickened. A resident, looking shaken, entered the waiting room. There have been complications with the match, unexpected markers showed up. The team is troubleshooting and consulting a specialist. Alexander reeled. All the struggle, all the preparation, now teetered on some unpredictable corner of biology. He battled a surge of helpless rage. He wanted to smash something, to hurl accusations at the world. Instead, he crumpled into his chair, silent, spent. In the meantime, Ethan's room was being readied for post-op, but no one could say when, or even if, he would return there alive. Alexander, grasping for control, opened Mariah's letter. The hospital's crisis made the words inside more alive than ever. Love was not about holding back the tide, but about standing undeterred in its surging dark. Mariah's story became his prayer: let pain have purpose. Let suffering bind, not destroy. Minutes dragged past. In the corridor, Mariah's attending surgeon emerged, mask lowered, face drawn. "She's stable," he announced. "The worst has passed, but the next hours will decide everything." Alexander's knees buckled with relief and terror in equal measure. "What does that mean for Ethan?" he asked, voice barely working. "It means he's in recovery, but we're waiting for final diagnostics." There were surprises. "We'll know more soon," answered the surgeon with frank exhaustion. Alexander stood in the hallway for a long time, not sure what he prayed for anymore. Maybe just the will to face whatever came next. At last, the long hands of the clock swung to evening. The head nurse called Alexander into a side room. "There is something you must know," she began, and when the hospital social worker joined them, a chill swept through him. "In the testing, genetic markers emerged. There's a potential familial connection between Ethan and Mariah we didn't anticipate. The organ responded better than predicted, almost as if there's a closer match than we knew." Alexander felt history turn inside out. He thought of Mariah's years of secrecy, her careful quietness, the missing gaps in Ethan's family history. 1,000 unspoken moments crowded his mind, old photographs, hospital files, and his own failures to look further than the present. Could Mariah be? He started, but the nurse cut him off. "We don't know yet. Genetics can be strange. But the next steps will require consent for deeper testing, and answers may emerge. For now, both are alive and recovering. You can see Ethan first. Mariah is still under sedation." On trembling legs, Alexander walked to Ethan's post-op room. His son slept, color returning to his cheeks, machines monitoring slow and steady progress. Alexander sat beside him, holding his small hand, wordless gratitude coursing through him. For the first time since the ordeal began, relief and hope intertwined. He was allowed a brief visit to Mariah's room, where the medical team was withdrawing lines and monitoring vitals every few minutes. She was pale, drained, but breathing deeply. Alexander managed only a quiet, "Thank you," whispering it as if it could drift into her dreams and mend all the distances between their lives. He stayed in the hospital that night, caught in a liminal space of partial answers and countless questions. The organ transplant had succeeded, but mysteries remained, about family, about truth, about the possibility Mariah and Ethan were bound by more than fate and sacrifice. As morning began to glimmer along the blinds, Alexander made a quiet vow: no more secrets, no more cowardice. The answers must come, whatever pain they brought. With both Mariah and Ethan alive but mysteries emerging, the final revelation draws near. Family ties, identity, and the true depth of sacrifice now stand exposed in the dawn's uncertain light. When it is darkest, time slows and cracks. The night after Mariah's sacrifice, Alexander sat by Ethan's bedside, unable to sleep even as his son drifted in a morphine haze. Machines hummed in steady rhythm, framing the boy's delicate recovery, a miracle bought by risk, grace and blood. The world outside the recovery suite seemed impossibly distant, the pulse of the city, the rumble of cold morning traffic, the relentless march of every life that kept moving as if this family's struggle was nothing. The silence was broken by the shuddered breaths of his boy in the dim light and the echo of Mariah's name whispered in Ethan's dreams. Alexander brushed Ethan's hair from his eyes, terrified every movement might undo everything they'd struggled for. So much had changed, love found and lost, secrets uncovered. And yet, life in this small, bright room was all that remained. Tension humming. If this hits your heart, like and subscribe now for what's next. Ethan woke with dawn, fragile and pale but smiling weakly, fingers curling around the plush tiger. "Daddy?" His voice was raw, uncertain. "Where's Mariah? Did the magic work?" Alexander tried to smile, hugging his son gently. "She's healing, just like you." A nurse entered, quietly optimistic. "Vitals are stable." "It's remarkable." Alexander thanked her, words now spoken in honest gratitude, not the reflex of someone who expected servants to vanish. He glanced at the empty chair where Mariah had sat every day, overcome by longing for her quiet, steadfast courage. Down the hall, Mariah was coming awake from sedation. She didn't remember the surgeons, the flurry of masked faces, the moment the world went from cold to nothing. She remembered only an image, her brother Jamal's face, his smile, his promise that everything broken could be remade when people cared enough to try. Mariah's body ached, but pain was familiar, a landscape known since grief became her shadow. As she blinked awake, she saw Alexander standing in the doorway, holding a folder, his face marked with exhaustion and something else, fear, maybe, or hope. He moved to sit by her bed, not knowing what to say. "I have news," he managed. "The genetics team discovered something. Ethan, he's your nephew. Priscilla, your half-sister, never spoke of you." He watched her take in the revelation, the shock, the old pain layered with something like relief. Mariah let the tears come. "I always wondered. When I first saw Ethan, I felt Jamal's spirit. Like family calls to family, even across time. I didn't want to destroy what you had left. You gave us everything," Alexander said, voice breaking. "You gave Ethan a future." Their hands touched, uncertainty linking them. Outside, the hospital was awakening, and news was spreading. Staff whispered about the story of the billionaire's son saved by a maid who was truly kin. Reporters camped at corners, security doubled. But the real drama was in the rooms where the three fought for understanding in a world too quick to judge. Ethan made rapid progress, drawing shy smiles from nurses and high fives from interns. His primary doctor declared him fit for discharge far sooner than expected, stunned by the boy's resilience. The transplant, risky from the start, was now described as a rare, fortuitous miracle of medicine and heart. Alexander squared his shoulders, suddenly protective. He sensed that the quiet which had once haunted the mansion might soon be replaced by scrutiny and questions he couldn't answer. Moments of ease were fleeting. Mariah's recovery was slower, complicated by a fever no one expected and a melancholy obvious to Ethan the first time she visited him in his room. Ethan wiggled onto her bed, held her too tight, and whispered, "Don't go away again." Mariah kissed his forehead, hiding worry behind practiced calm. "I'll always find you." But even as she said it, her eyes found Alexander's, asking if the world could ever let them remain unbroken. Crackling as tension builds, to see the truth come out, like and subscribe for the next reveal. The mansion reawakened with Ethan's return. Lights blazed, silence banished by new routines, a steady stream of doctors, rehab therapists, journalists pressing for interviews. Alexander shielded Ethan and Mariah, refusing interviews, conducting meetings in back offices and by phone, his old life fighting for space against this new, fragile peace. He met with his former wife, Priscilla, for the first time since the storm broke. Her face was drawn but fierce, love for Ethan undiminished and fear etched in every wrinkle. "How could you keep this from me?" she accused, her voice low. "It wasn't mine to know or tell," Alexander admitted. "But Mariah, she saved him because that's what family does." Priscilla met Mariah at the hospital, the women silent before tears mended old wounds. They found unexpected comfort in each other, pain no longer a wedge but a bridge for Ethan's sake. Priscilla, once a shadow in the house, stayed for dinners and night watches, learning to forgive the man who'd been both the architect of her sorrow and her son's redemption. Meanwhile, Mariah wrestled with her own decision. Should she stay, now that her secret had shattered the old order? Would the world, with all its headlines and noise, allow her to be merely Ethan's aunt, not the maid who saved a billionaire's son? She packed her things one morning, prepared to leave before Alexander intercepted her with a quiet plea, "Let's build something real, not just survive." But the question clung in the air, did Mariah owe this new family another chance, or was her place somewhere else, healing wounds torn open by years of loss? Hospital bills mounted, and the legal storm brewed outside. The truth about family ties forced the hospital administration to review every detail, fearing lawsuits or tabloid scandal. Alexander called in his legal team, uncertain if any sum could protect those he now loved most. Threats came from Ethan's mother's estranged relatives, sudden claimants awakened by news reports. Alexander stood at the gates, refusing access with unyielding resolve. All the while, Ethan sensed the tension. Once, he asked Alexander, "Are we safe now?" Alexander knelt before him, promising, "I will never let anyone take you away, not even my own mistakes." Tense as secrets swirl, witness what happens. Like and subscribe for the final turning point. One sleepless night, Alexander found Mariah deep in the library, reading one of Jamal's old letters. She started to rise, but he sat across from her, hands outstretched, honest at last. "What do you want?" he asked, not as employer, but as kin. Mariah struggled. "I want Ethan to be happy. I want you to see me, not as what I've done, but for why I did it. I want forgiveness, and maybe a home." "You have both," Alexander whispered. Time slipped forward, each day blending recovery and learning anew the meaning of family. Birthdays were no longer missed, laughter returned to the halls, and Ethan thrived beneath the gaze of two women who had crossed every line to save him. Yet tranquility remained elusive. The media waited for a storybook ending. Investors questioned Alexander's judgment, charities begged Mariah for endorsements. Someone leaked part of Mariah's adoption file, and cameras arrived at school gates and hospital lobbies. In private, the family found strength in each other, but the world outside pushed relentlessly for answers they barely understood themselves. One cold afternoon, as winter breath threatened to freeze new hope, Alexander called a family meeting. Priscilla, Mariah, Ethan, all sat together in the solarium, facing a world bent on splitting them apart. "We have a choice," Alexander said. "We defend what we've built, together, or let the world take it." Mariah, uncertain but strong, replied, "Family survives in truth, not just secrets. We do this together." Priscilla nodded. She, too, understood at last that forgiveness was the bedrock, not the finish line. Ethan, face serious beneath his mess of curls, asked only, "Can we just be us?" The family agreed to a rare, carefully scripted interview, words chosen to share hope, not private pain. Mariah and Alexander spoke of faith, sacrifice, and love's power to heal, refusing to fan the tabloid flames. Yet, as the cameras faded and the night drew close, a new letter arrived. An old college friend of Priscilla's, now a genealogist, claimed there may be yet another lost sibling, one whose medical history could further change everything about Ethan's healing and identity. The news fell into the room like a stone in a still pond, ripples of possibility, dread, hope, and danger undulating outward. Mariah clutched her nephew, Alexander braced himself against a new wave of uncertainty, and Priscilla wept, equal parts relief and fear. As darkness fell and the world outside clamored louder, the family found themselves, once more, at the beginning of another story, history layered with wounds, promises, and the chance for newfound strength. That night, as the mansion's lights flickered against the cold, Ethan whispered to Mariah, "If there's someone else like us, will you find them?" Mariah promised, voice steady, eyes bright with hope and the ache of uncertainty, "I will never stop searching. No matter what." Beyond the walls, headlines multiplied. Lawsuits whispered threats. In the deepest parts of the house, Alexander watched his new family, the nurse, the broken father, the son, the woman who had risked all for the possibility of tomorrow, knowing that love endures, but peace is never guaranteed. As the chapter closed, a phone rang, an unknown caller, bearing answers or dangers yet unseen. The story is not over. To journey through every turning, like and subscribe for what's next.